We used to have 110,000 employees. We currently have in the Netherlands 21,000 employees, and it's, in my opinion, not possible to really focus 21,000 employees on one thing. You have to get it smaller.
You can see the examples in the banks now. There are people in the top not really knowing what the primary process in the banks is. They don't even know what kind of bank they are. Read the stories, read the interviews. They were busy with among each other, but not with the business. There's still people in the top. And it, for them, it counts for everybody. You can deal with in some situations with 15, maybe 20 people. And they only know 20 people out of the 200,000 part of the big organization. So they don't know what the other 19,980 people are really doing, what they're thinking, what their mentality is.
I worked in a division of IBM called Lotus Development Company. It's a well-known software. We never saw any, no one ever came to see us. So we were an important part, no one, ever. So the decisions that affected our lives were made by people we never spoke to.
What you see is that for some companies, the fact that they are big, the span of control is too big and that they cannot control it, that's true. So some bigger companies, for them it might be more efficient to be cut up in smaller companies, but I think a company, for example, which is building a plane, you can't do it with a lot of freelancers. You need a big factory, you need a kind of organization to build these big planes, you need an infrastructure.
The customer gets lost into the big company and the people inside the big company have no clue what the customer really wants. And so there is a sort of barrier.
I would think the forms that we have of organizations today really came about in the late 19th century, middle to late 19th century, and it was based on the military, command and control hierarchies. That was the only model they had in the late 19th century, mid to late 19th century. The only model was the military. That's how you organize men to do this sort of work. And Henry Ford very famously said, "I don't want to pay for the worker's head, I only want his arm." That's gone. That's really, I mean, we still have to manufacture things, but robots, technology, and very cheap labor has displaced that. Everyone has to make money in different ways, and all those things are forms of knowledge: persuasion, creativity, design, various things, because you can't make, you know, a perfect example of this is Milan. You go to Milan, it's the second richest city in continental Europe. There's no manufacturing in Milan at all. What there is design. And they make a lot of money at that. So we have to fight more in terms of creating wealth. It's not going to be on manufacturing, and the firms are still organized on manufacturing basis. And that all has to, it's going to change, will change, although I don't think many of them will voluntarily change. I think they'll just sink like the dinosaurs into the mud and never know why they died. Will it look like a university? Maybe it'll look like Oxford or the Sorbonne or Harvard. Will it look like the UN or the World Bank? Will it look like a giant think tank? Will it look like something you and I haven't thought about yet? But it won't look like what it looks like now because the sources of its value has shifted. It will not look, you won't have these large, hierarchical, silo-based firms anymore. Another reason people don't want to work in them. They don't like working in those firms. They're not fun. Your ideas don't get heard. They're bureaucratic. And the people who rise to the top are not the people you most admire or respect. They're people who have power and focus, and they say, I'm going to get ahead. But it's not people you really want to make decisions for you. So I think these firms will be much flatter. They'll be much more knowledge intensive, where the rewards will go more for finding ideas, developing ideas, sharing ideas. They'll look very different. Maybe they'll look like McKinsey or a large consultant firm. That probably, if I had a bet, I would think it'll be more like that.
Often organisations look at a strategy and try to project it over 12 months. I don't think that's going to be possible in the future. What it's really about is execution. If I was to be unkind, you could dream up a strategy in a shower, but executing it is enormously difficult. And organisations traditionally are not very good at executing. I think being a little bit better than last year, 10 or 15%, is not good enough. We had to be significantly better than we were before, and probably significantly different. And that requires an agile organisation.
Well, I think the most important things that you see in traditional corporate life is very much command and control, very much cost-driven, very compartmentalized organizations. And what I think that we will get is somewhat much flatter organizations, much more related on collaborations, much smaller units, closer to the customer, and having a better face and a better appeal towards the customer base. It's what is sometimes referred to as firms of endearment. Companies need to split themselves up in customer-orientated service chains, so to say, and have those service chains being managed rather independently.
The principles of the new era will be the different principles, and that's what we're now trying to find out in those days. Trees, you know what a tree is. You can see a big trees. They are beautiful, of course. They're very well impressive to see them, and we call them trees. Rhizomes are also plants, but you don't hardly see them because these are the roots under the surface, and they can be much more bigger than a tree. It's also a big organization. Only we experience them as many small plants at the surface. So that's the image I very often use. We will have more rhizomes in the future. It looks all kind of small organizations, but in some way they're all connected to each other, and that might be even much more bigger than the organization themselves. Because maybe you also can say we're not. Maybe we live in the era of the dying dinosaurs, but something much bigger will come in place. Not something smaller, something much bigger. But it will not be central controlled. It will not be the power in the center. So there will still people work together. This organizing will be still there.
And if you look at all the changes, increasement in productivities we have had in the past, it's not the technological innovation, but much more the management innovation. For instance, if you look at, and I go back in history, if you look at a Ford, it was the mass production concept. It's not a new technology, it's a different way of organizing. Then it was the M form, you work with divisions and you can increase productivity. Now, if you now see at many Dutch companies, manufacturing companies, it's a concept of self-organization, which is a management innovation, which results in higher productivity, but also in higher motivation of the workers within the organization.
But there will be other basic rules. And we know that already from the theories around complexity. That, if you take a flock of birds, it's a very complex situation, as it looks a very complex situation. But if you look very well, you will see that there are only a few called simple, basic rules. And we have to find out what will be the basic rules of these flocks of humans working together in the future.
I think one of the major changes that is also taking place is that we have to empower people to make it more possible to get things done for customers. And that can be done by reducing a large amount of workload, for instance, in all kind of business rules that are applicable anymore if you really look into it and even make that easier. Why all those business rules exist, and take them away and make it easier for employees here to serve the customer in a really fast manner. And that can be possible if we look at it in a more holistic way. And not from silo thinking. We have to, I think, a real paradigm shift to make it really possible.
In fact, one of my favorite examples is called Right Solutions up in Rhode Island. They've created an internal stock market inside their company for ideas. Instead of what they call them mutual funds, their stock market is called Mutual Fund, where people can propose new IPOs, and all the employees who've been giving fake money where they want to invest, when suddenly an IPO grabs enough investment level, that thing launches for real.